Hey, book lovers, I'm Aubrey.
And I'm Peyton.
And today we are reviewing The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune.
Yes, so join us with a cup of coffee as we dive between these paper sheets. Let's do this. Welcome back to the Hardcover Podcast.
Hello,
I am
everyone.
so excited for today's episode. But before we get into this book, I do want to let everyone know this is our NS section. No non-spoilers, no spoilers whatsoever. We will let you know when we get into our spoiler section. We like to break up our videos this way just so people who are interested in the book and maybe want to read it, but if you haven't read this book yet, we are late on the train. So, but we do want to offer just quick little star ratings, thoughts, and feelings of the book before we jump into all the juicy details of this book because Lord knows there are a lot.
Yes, we actually found out about this book. Not that we hadn't heard of it before, but we decided we wanted to read it during our reacting to the fall releases for 2024 list. Book 2 just came out, so it's kind of relevant.
Yeah.
And in that, we read the description. We were like, huh? I would have never guessed that's what the book's about, which is super exciting. So, if you also would have never guessed, The House in the Cerulean Sea follows Linus Baker. He works for the government, and in this fantasy adjacent world, they're still in Earth, but it's just like Earth with people who have magical powers. He works for the department in charge of magical youth, Daikami, and he is sent on a very top secretive mission. He's like a caseworker, so basically like a social worker, and his job is to go to these orphanages, which are houses for these children with magical powers because they are being highly discriminated against, and basically all kids who have magical powers have to be documented and regulated and live in these houses. And Linus's job is to go to these houses, orphanages, and just check in, just
Yep.
see if everything is being held up to status quo and if the children are safe. Well, he is sent by extremely upper management on this top secret case to an island by the ocean, might be a house by the Cerulean Sea, to go and see, just check out this other house that has some very special and unique children, including the Antichrist.
Yes.
So the plot goes from there as he has a 1 month long stay at this wonky, whimsical home.
Yes, that is a perfect way to summarize this book, and that is what captured our hearts. I mean, of course, I think I don't know when this book was actually released. I feel like it was COVID times ish.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought around 2020.
Yeah. So somewhere around there, but I mean, I've seen the book cover before. Like everyone has seen this book, but it's I don't know, some sort of fantasy. I was not expecting the story that was going to be in here.
No,
So
it's so cute and
it is
heartwarming.
amazing. And what makes, other than TJ Klune's one of a kind writing style, which we're gonna get into in a second, the thing the parts of this book that just jump off the page and make the book are the characters.
Yeah.
And so in our non-spoiler section, I do want to overview our cast of characters. I can run through them quick, Aubrey, just so everyone knows who we're dealing with. And if I love you all enough and you're watching on YouTube, I will post some fan art of those characters to kind of
Yes.
get you in the mood. But
The
I
fan
have
art's so
they
adorable
are
too.
the best. And I do have to say,
Yes.
just one quick thing for the writing style.
Mhm.
I did not have to be like, "Oh, what's that look like?" Or "What does that do?"
Yeah.
I already knew.
Mhm.
The minute TJ Klune was like, "Bup, bup, 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 bup," I was like, "Yep," in my head. And then
I'm
when I
there.
looked at the fan art, I was like so affirmed. I was like, "That is just an ode to his writing style." So,
Yeah.
anyways, our characters, our children, of course, the headmaster of the house is Arthur Parnassus. He is like literal daddy to all these children. He's this
Daddy.
very thin, sassy-ish gay man, but with the biggest heart. And he has all
Mhm.
these valuable life lessons for these kids constantly. And they worship the ground Arthur walks on.
Yeah.
And Arthur just straight up loves these children.
Mhm.
Um, and then there's another person on the island named Zoe, and she is a sprite, right? She's a
Yes.
water sprite.
Right?
Uh,
And I think she's an island sprite.
yeah, it's like
I
her
don't know.
island.
Yes, I don't know the full classification
I
here,
think
the word
book 2 will jump into that.
yeah,
I really do.
yeah.
Um, anyway, so she is also very protective over the children and
Mhm.
very protected over the island. So those are, like, the 2 adults on the island.
Okay.
Now, getting into these children, most
These
importantly, we have
beautiful
Lucy,
children.
who is
Yes.
short for Lucifer. We do not call him the Antichrist because we do not use those words on this island.
We do not
Um
use those words in that language in our house.
Yes, so Lucy is the son of the devil, and he has, like obviously, he's everyone's favorite character in this book because the things that come out of that little six-year-old boy's mouth is fucking hilarious. But he has all of this, like, destruction and evil in him, and he loves playing, like, harmless pranks, and he's really creative, and he has really dark humor,
Yeah.
but he is, at the end of the day, a six-year-old innocent child.
Mhm.
He has, like, a heart full of love. Talia, I love Talia. She's actually a gnome, and they always talk about the beard that she has.
Yeah.
She's incredibly feisty, is always threatening to bury Linus, our main character, 6 feet underground with her shovels, and so she loves, to garden, and she has also a witty personality, but she's fiercely herself, and she's super protective over the other kids.
Yes, I
Um,
kind of pictured her as Smurfette, which isn't how you're supposed to picture her, but
yeah,
I don't know why, something about Garden Gnome, like, the Smurfs really did a big one on me as a kid, and
I could see this, yeah, and I also pictured her like the movie Romeo and Juliet.
yeah.
I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like," I totally pictured it. Now, my favorite character's name is Chauncey.
Ooh.
He is this no one really knows what he is, but
Yeah.
picture like a green blob, like maybe from like
Yeah.
Monsters Inc. or something, like just green
Mhm.
blob. He has tentacles and he can like turn into a puddle on the ground. He's green, like he is so cute, and his dream is to be a bellhop.
Yeah, isn't
And
that
he just
so
wants to
sweet?
help others, and he was told his whole life he was a monster and should scare people, but he's actually just like the sweetest green blob, and no one really gets him because he's a green blob and no one's ever seen a green blob before. But he's sweet and optimistic and kind and just wants to be a damn bellhop. Sal
He
is an
just wants his
interesting
tip.
yeah, exactly. He just wants his tip. Um, Sal is an interesting
Mhm.
character. He is a shapeshifter who is incredibly anxious and scared all the time,
Yeah.
because he's been in like 12 other orphanages before this one. And
Mhm.
when he gets really scared, he'll transform into a Pomeranian. So, and
Mhm.
Sal is this huge, like, teenage boy,
Yeah.
like linebacker on the football team, like huge, but he's just this gentle, sweet, scared boy who doesn't talk a lot. And his best friend is Theodore, and I love
Mhm.
Theodore because he's a wyvern and he can fly and he speaks his own little language and he's obsessed with little shiny objects. And he collects them like underneath their couch in their living room. He doesn't he talks through his own language.
Mhm.
Similar to Talia, she speaks Gnomish, and so Theodore's really cute. He's just Sal's buddy. He's always like on his shoulder. And the last one is Fee. She's also a sprite, but she's a forest sprite, and she's the
Yes.
ability to control and manipulate plants and the forest. The island has
Mhm.
a bunch of forest on it, so that's kind of like her place. And sprites are known for being super territorial. So similar to
Mhm.
Talia, she's like, what's going on here? She's super wise and she looks to Zoe a lot because she's a sprite. But
Yeah, I think she's also, like, our resident teenager, and she has, like, a lot of those, like, teenager, like, ugh, like,
yeah,
quirks.
she's kind of like super pretty and older. Her and Sal are like the oldest of the group, and all the other
Mhm.
ones, they're like the little kids that we all need
Yeah.
to tend to. But anyways, those are the children. I think it's really important to get that baseline. So when we're like, oh, Chauncey or Talia, it's like we know who we are dealing with. But the
Yes.
characters are what make the story
Mhm.
in this book. So if
They're
you
why we picked it up, like, we
yeah,
heard the character list, and we are like, "Yes, ma'am."
I don't care what the
"Yes,
plot is.
sir."
Those kids seem amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. So who's your favorite, Aubrey? Who's your favorite character?
I mean, probably Lucy,
I mean, come
or
on.
I did really like Talia, whichever
Yeah.
way we're pronouncing it. I have a soft spot in my heart for her.
Yes, we'll get into it in the spoiler section, but when Talia first meets Linus, I was like, "Love her." This is like, she is just the best. She's so sassy,
Yeah.
and her and Lucy are like besties,
They're
and
like
they're like
the
one for
rambunctious
one.
kids.
They're
Like,
like
I
the
worked
yeah.
at a daycare, and you know those kids that you're like, "I don't want them partnered together," and at a certain point in the book, Linus, like, has them partnered together and gets assigned to, like, be their caretaker for a moment, and he is like, "Seriously? Those 2? Those 2?" And I, like, felt that in my heart of being like, they're the cutest, but you know what I mean? Like, it's always, like, the bad kids are sometimes like you're like, "Oh, you're so cute, you're so entertaining, you're so fun. You make my heart hurt."
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's like, it's like the chaperone on the field trip that's like, oh, you get the two bad kids, and then we
Yeah.
get all the 50 other good kids because they're going to
Yeah.
behave, but you need to focus your energy on these just two kids because they equal 50 kids or like, 10 kids or whatever. But yeah, Lucy, I mean, hands down is like the
Mhm.
center of the book of the kids in the story. The line, like, it's so the comedic genius that comes out of that 6-year-old's mouth, and the fact that we are dealing with, like, this, like, Satan's son, like, it is
Mhm.
fucking hilarious. But yeah, Talia is like a run up for me. I have such a sweet spot in my heart for Chauncey. But yes, so going along with that, the writing style.
Yes.
Aubrey started this book before me,
Mhm.
and I came over to her house, and she's like, "You're gonna love this book." And I was like, "Really?" She's like, "It's just a Pixar movie." And I started
Yep.
reading, and I was like, TJ Klune basically wrote a script for a Pixar movie. They just needed to animate it. You know what I mean? Like, it's a Pixar
It's
movie.
yes, it's so, like, whimsical and fun, and there is this, like, the entire time, this almost suspension of disbelief where he can have things happen that, like, I don't know, it's just, like, something in the way he is so specific and whimsical in his writing that even in the very beginning, we're watching Linus go to his job. And obviously, the first few chapters are to set up the stark contrast of when he's in his government job to when he's on the island with the kids. And I could just see it so clearly in my head. It's like him on the bus to work, and then it's raining, and
It's
then him
gray and
in his like cramped government office where all these like desks in lines, and he like bumps them as he walks past, and they can't have personal effects. Or when he goes to see upper management, and I think he like walked into the room and it was dark, and then lights started like flickering up on all of the CEOs' faces. Like, is that not a Pixar film?
it's such a Pixar film. Like, oh my, like, so like the writing, if
Mhm.
you think you're gonna be bored in this book, you're not. It's just gonna jump
No.
off the page, but there's
Yeah.
this fantastical, whimsical element to it that makes it fun, and it makes it fairy tale esque because, which we're gonna get into later, there are some
Mhm.
very key themes in this book.
Yes.
Like a good Pixar film, there's
Mhm.
always a message, and this book has an incredibly profound message. And
Yeah, and I think that
yeah,
when TJ Klune wrote this, he'd sat down with the message in mind. Like, I don't think this was one of those stories where, the message comes through where there's different themes they wanted to touch on, but they wanted to tell the story. No, TJ Klune wanted to deliver this message, and it's very heavy handed, but in a way that, like, I guess from my perspective of thinking of it as like a Pixar film type story, I didn't mind how heavy-handed it was. I don't think that took me out of the book. I think it kind of made me it's a thinking book where they draw to light, and he'd have these comparisons, and he'd had his message he wanted to tell, and I was like, "Yeah. Yes, and you're right."
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, some people, like, I was reading some reviews of this book, and so if you haven't
Yeah.
read it yet, some people said the message can be very preachy or a little too much, but I'm like, but that's kind of like the point.
Yeah.
Like, we're a lot of this is prejudices we have against people without actually knowing them, labeling people for who they are,
Mhm.
to deal a lot with humanity and the family we find because we don't fit in. And that can
Yeah.
mean sexuality, that can mean, in this case, these kids that don't fit into what's normal in humanity. And so it can be that way, but it's actually, we're learning with the kids about who we are and all that. So I never thought it was too preachy. I was more just so like, oh, like a Pixar movie. It's heartfelt, it's
Yeah,
supposed to
I
be
think
teaching us, the kids, adults reading this book about these things and bringing to light a very serious thing that isn't fantasy. It's not whimsical. It's real life that's happening
Mhm.
every day in 2025. So I didn't mind it.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things where, like, know it going in, know that
Sure.
it's going to be heavy-handed in its message, and then if that's not your thing, I think that's fine, but I don't think it was, like, one of those situations where TJ Klune sat down to write a story and it ended up being preachy and his biases went in. He went into it being preachy, but I think it can be so heavy-handed because there's such excellent writing, characters, wit, and entertainment balancing the story out. Like if all we had were these like very pointed
Lessons.
scenes where it's like
Yeah.
this is exactly like the line of what he's drawing to in real life is straight.
Yeah.
There's not a curve, there's not a bit of interpretation. It is a straight line. The government is called extremely upper management.
Yeah.
Like
It's
we're
not
not
supposed to
being
be that deep.
shy
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, but we're making up for it in the fact like it's still so entertaining, and I think I read this book in like 4 days
Yeah, I did too.
because it's so good and I wanted to keep reading.
I know. I know. And also, if the messaging and the preachiness, if you wanna call it that, I don't, I
Yeah.
just call it good storytelling, is annoying to you, you're the problem.
Like,
Sorry.
well, you can be like, was that making you uncomfortable because you see yourself in that? And
Yeah.
I think that that's where, especially like older generation people, like they can't like that's like just take it and learn from it.
Alright, so, we kinda went over characters, writing style, the messaging. We need to rate this book. I mean, come on.
Yes.
Aubrey, what did you rate it?
I gave this 1 star. No, I gave this book 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I think that there was something so like whimsical and magical in this story. I think it was so perfect to get to know all these kids and they all had such like vibrant personalities and lives. I liked the pacing. It was very entertaining the entire time. Like I was like, "Oh, yep, I can keep going. I can keep going." I think I read like 100 pages
I
in
know,
each
crazy.
sitting. That is not something that Aubrey normally does. I think for me, I hate the beginning of books. The
Yes.
beginning of books feel so slow and drawn out, and I have to force myself to get 40, 50 pages in. I
Yes.
did not have to do that with this
Yeah,
book.
and that's
Not
a
at all.
five-star read to me is if I am like, "When can I read it
Yeah.
next?" Or like, "Oh, I've read 100 pages, that
Yes.
went by." So this is a five-star for me, of course. I am so happy. This is like my second book of the year, and we're already starting off the year with a bang. Like, and I'm excited to read the next one. So, and that doesn't happen these days. So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And we get to read
I
the
know.
next one right
Look
away.
at
Everyone
us.
else had to
We're
wait
like
4
being
years.
behind has helped for once. So guys, like A++ hardcover stamp of approval. We love this book, and if you don't, you're not allowed. Just kidding. You're
Yeah.
not allowed to watch this. Anyway, so absolutely love this one. So let's get on to our spoiler section.
Yes, and this is a perfect time if you've made it this far to give this video a like and subscribe. Liking the video helps push it out so more people can hear us chat about the books that we love. Helps us out a ton, and we love all of you guys' support and community as we dive into the spoil
This
section.
book, as I said, is very character driven. So it's I think we should just
Yeah.
kind of go over like the main parts of the book, our feelings. We can be and uncensored now
Hmm.
about them all, how we felt. And yeah. So I kind of broke up this spoiler section into just those hard
Okay.
hitting points of the book that we can talk about. And so the big thing, which you already touched on, Aubrey, was the difference between the life in the city and the life on, I think
Hmm.
it's Marseilles Island,
Yeah.
the island.
Something like
So
that. The
like
island.
Pixar
Yes.
movie, imagine this, it's a movie, drab, gray, horrible, mundane, and then he goes
Yes.
on this train ride, which like
Hmm.
this magical train that like doesn't take that long to get to this island, but he just like shows up. Like I imagine him being in like horrible, like miserable Seattle, Washington, and, like, he rides up to, like, I
Yeah.
don't know, like, beautiful sunny like, down to sunny California or something like that. And then it's, like,
Mhm.
rainbows, butterflies, beautiful island. Very different.
This actually it made me think about, if you guys have probably heard of the author Brandon Sanderson. He took a tour of the Pixar studios once. I believe it was Pixar. It was either Pixar or Disney, but same vibe. And they had up on the walls of the studios the color mapping, and what they would try to do is whatever emotion they're trying to convey in that scene, they try to have the most of the color for it. So, like we could see in this, like the gray being like drowy and drear, and then the against the like bright vibrance of the sea and the house and all of that. And I feel like TJ Klune like heard that and like locked in from how Pixar does it. And I think that's why I keep pulling back to Pixar, because not just like the messaging, the pacing, the whimsy elements, the color in this book. When you're talking about like the city, I see all of these, everything's in gray hues, and then you go to the island and you can see everything in
Technicolor.
this like bright shades. I mean, it was important enough that it's in the title of the book. Like it's not just the
Yeah.
blue
It's
sea. You know what I
vibrant. Like
mean?
cerulean is a different color, like we can't even like obtain in our minds. Like, and the fact that those were words
Yeah.
and we saw it in our head, like I just can't get over it. So anyways, we meet our main character Linus, who like I love what he's
Yes.
our main character, he's our POV, right? But in the same
Mhm.
breath, he didn't feel like the staple of the story. He was more so like the narrator of the story, I felt like, because every character
Yeah.
was so important and held so much their own weight on these pages and in every line. But he's like super strict and rule driven and does things by the rules and regulations. Like the fact that he gave it like a name like that, like it's comedic genius. The rules and regulations basically of like how to convey yourself, the standards, like this is basically like what corporate America has said, and you need to follow the rules. And he's a rule follower,
Mhm.
and he gets this promotion because this like I guess contract or like assignment because he is
Yeah.
the most like dedicated rule
Mhm.
driven person. But it's your typical office life where it's like, oh, if you have done something like that's a strike, like oh that's a strike, oh you're a little like 2 minutes late, that's
Mhm.
a strike, or so we just get this, so you see him in the beginning of the book, you're like, okay, so he's gonna be completely different by the end, it's just how we're gonna get there, and it took a while. I was
Yeah.
like, is he gonna change or not? But
It took
he's
a
a lonely
while.
man. He has a cat,
Something
and so he doesn't like have family or friends. So he is kind of a miserable person.
Something that I actually really enjoyed is that I felt like Linus was such like an autistic coded character, and there's actually a bunch of like Reddit theories and like people posting about this because he's taking everything that he sees at such face value. There's this like underlying knowing how heavy-handed it is message of it being like, okay, but these kids, like, this isn't the best system. This is a bad system. This is a criticism of bureaucracy and bureaucracy in taking care of children and prejudice and all of that. But Linus is missing every single one of those steps because in his heart, he is like, what matters most to me is the safety of the children. Like, he is one of those people where he is part of the inn. He is part of this privileged society of not being one of the magical people, of working for the government, of enforcing the government's at time harmful rules. And I liked that it mentioned at one point, it was like, well, like dichotomy was created because the system before that was worse. Like it was a step of progress,
Like
but
this
that
is
doesn't
it.
mean we have to just
Yeah,
accept it and be like, we're done. Like, no, like we want to keep working towards progress. But because he was so like stuck in his head and he didn't really care about the not that he didn't I guess he just didn't put in the effort to care about the other
it's a
person's
job.
perspective. He was very much like, this is my job. They would be like, well, what happens after you shut down the orphanage? And he's like, well, that's not my classification anymore. Like that's not for me to worry about. I'm worrying about what
Right.
my specific role is. And so you got to watch him like open his eyes and be like, okay, no, I can't just follow the rules and regulations. Like I am developing strong, intense connections with these kids. And it was so like wonderful and
Absolutely.
heart like warming to witness that. And he never lost that edge of being like, "Well,
Yeah,
this
I
is how
love,
I think
he's
things
very
are."
true to himself, but also he's sort of
Yeah.
blind to a lot of it. Even, you'd think
Mhm.
being boots on the ground in these orphanages, you'd have this sort of he is an empathetic person. He wants, but it's very like rules and regulations.
Yeah, I think that's part of this, like, autistic coding that's going on because he's just like, "Well, no, I care, I have empathy, I'm seeing what I'm seeing," but, like, he doesn't have like, horses, how they will have those blinders on and they can only see forward so they
But
don't
this is
get
my job.
spooked. He's like, "This is my job, and I'm gonna put all of my caring and empathy in this, like, front-facing blinders." And then to use the metaphor that TJ Klune uses in this story, like, his bubble gets popped or his blinders get removed by forcing to make those connections and dive in when he goes to the island.
Yeah, so this is Simon is one of a kind. When he gets called by extremely upper management, they have
Mhm.
like different classifications. Like he's moving into classification 4, which is like the
Or
highest situation. For
which is so funny.
for
Level
some
4.
yeah, level 4. For some weird reason,
Mhm.
when he was going up with like Miss Bubblegum or whatever, like her
Yeah.
name is, love that. Um it reminded me of that scene in Barbie where they go to Mattel and
Okay.
they're like going up the elevator and she like walks in that conference room with all the men. And
Mhm.
like it just for some reason it just reminded me of this like extremely upper management, like, oh, we're at
Yeah.
Mattel, like the maker of Barbie,
Mhm.
and they like go up all these floors to like the upper
Yeah.
management. That kind of reminded me,
Mhm.
but in a very Pixar sort of like Incredibles Inside Out
Yeah.
kind of way.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I also thought it was super interesting that Charles, who is one of the upper management, the pretty handsome one, was then we find out Arthur's ex. Like that layer of complexity, I thought there was going to be more from the Charles character,
Me too.
even just in terms of being an ex or in terms of other like power pushing. And I think we might see more of that in the next book. But at the end, I mean, Charles resigned, like all the CEOs got fired and he like put his little statement out to the news. So I'm not sure, but I was like clocking something there in the beginning, but then I liked the way the story went. So it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
I have a quote here from talking about like Linus's like blinders or bubbles slowly being popped. It was when he first arrived at the island, and I gotta say, I was so nervous in the meeting with upper management when he was like, "But I have a cat." And they'll be like, "The cat's gonna be fine." I was like, "You better fucking take that cat." I was like, "If you don't take that cat, I'm gonna riot. I'm gonna be so pissed." He took the cat. It's fine. It's fine. We're safe. Um,
Calliope has main character energy.
yes. Actually, she was my favorite. So this is when he first arrives to the island, and Miss Chapelwhite, as we will know, Zoe, comes and picks him up, and they're driving through the village, and there's that scene of like all of the village folk kind of like locking, like cringing away, locking their doors, and treating Chapelwhite differently because of who she is. Um, and Linus says, "Why are they like this?" And she responds and says, "I don't pretend to know the minds of men. They fear what they don't understand, and fear turns to hate for reasons I'm not sure even they can begin to comprehend. And since they don't understand the children, since they fear them, they hate them, this can't be the first time you've heard of this. It happens everywhere. You don't hate anything." Then he said, "I don't hate anything." And he said, "You lie." And I think it was just like the first like eye-opening experience for Linus to be like, "Wait, what?"
Why are these people locking their doors? And she's
Yeah.
like, because we're here. Like, just do
Mhm.
something, say something.
Yeah, but that was like like one of, I mean, there's so many in the book, but where TJ Klune's like, "Okay, now this is me, the author speaking. Like this is what hate is, and it's because you don't understand." And like almost empathy towards these people. I think there is that level of if someone's reading this and they feel uncomfortable because they feel like they're being signaled out, they're being judged because of this book. Well, like, I mean, maybe that's right. Maybe you do need to be a little judged. Maybe you do need a little call out. Maybe you do need a wake up call.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there is a level of empathy towards that. I mean, we see characters like Helen and Linus who both have their blinders, who have their bubble, and it gets broken. And it's not well, fuck you, you weren't perfect from the beginning. It's a no, like that's great. Like
I'm
progress is
sorry.
going to be small. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like
So I
that
really like
empathy.
that.
It's the true empathy, not this fake empathy that people feel like they have. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, who are you? How do you really feel?
Mhm.
Love it. The entrance, this assignment, everything. Um, and then Calliope, they get there. They arrive.
Yes.
And Calliope, he takes Calliope out of this. I'm like, okay, she's gonna run away. She
She's gonna
darts.
run.
She runs away from him. And may
She's
I
like,
add, like,
"Bye."
I imagine it being kind of like dusk time. And
Mhm.
this cat, this is like a huge, like, I love the cover for that reason because I was looking at all
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
red van that they have, their like car, and then the big
Yeah.
mansion with the
Mhm.
turret on the top, which we know Lucy lives in, and all of that. So, anyways, he like Calliope takes off, and this is when we
Mhm.
meet our first child, Talia, and I think she was the best character to open up.
No, he's like such mastery of writing and plotting and having this scene because think of how overwhelming it would have been for the character, but also for the audience if we would have gone straight into the house, got a
All these
normal
characters.
introduction all at the same time. Instead, we get to one by one meet them. I loved it. I loved her. She being like, "Well, I'm gonna beat you with my shovel. I'm gonna dig your hole. Your
Also
grave."
also, may I add, like,
Mhm.
okay, so if Linus was such, like, a studious, like, employee, like, had,
Yeah.
like, the rules, why did this man, like, procrastinated opening up the files of these kids to look at them? Like, can we mention he got off the train and
Yeah.
opened up, realized he was, going to, like, basically judge the Antichrist, passes
Uh-huh.
out,
It's like fainted dead.
he's just like, "And I was done."
And that was it. And then he's like, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't open it anymore. And I understand from like out of narrative like
Yeah, that was
reasoning.
crazy.
It's so you can just meet them organically instead of reading everyone's files. But also Linus, my dude.
He's
You should have
so
just read the files. And I love his wit of being afterwards being like, yeah, next time I'll read the files first.
And he's just so uniquely himself. Like they didn't try to
Yeah.
make Linus this like strong, mysterious character. No, like
Mm-mm.
he's a like chubby nerd, like who just like is really quirky and is like really
Yeah.
himself. And like I just
So funny.
I loved that character Linus. And he's not the main character we
Hmm.
usually get. We usually get like Arthur as our main character. It
Yeah.
was so fun to be with Linus.
Yes, and to fall in love for the author
Yes.
Arthur like character. I loved every time he was like, "The day wasn't that bad," and then the next paragraph would be like, "The day is so incredibly horrible."
it's
It's like, I shouldn't have said a thing.
It's yeah, I just like it's just so funny. Anyways, so
Yes.
Linus meets all these children, which in the non-spoiler section, that's why I kind of
Mhm.
wanted to go over them.
Yeah.
Even though maybe it was a little long-winded, I just wanted to be like, hey, this is who we're dealing with. So we meet.
Mhm.
I love, as you said, Aubrey. I agree. I loved how we met each child,
Yeah.
and we were able to meet them, their personality, their wittiness, and also like how some of them were a little standoffish of him at first.
Mhm.
Like
As they
and
should.
also like Linus with Sal because Sal is actually a pretty big character by the end. He's
Mhm.
not really in the beginning of the book, but
But
Sal
he's
falls in
scared.
love with Calliope, and Linus
Mhm.
like yells at him in the beginning of the book, and he gets scared. He's like, "Hey,
Yeah.
what are you doing?" And he gets scared and goes into his
Mhm.
Pomeranian. Um, and we get to see that the progression of Linus and Sal's relationship of like Linus becoming this truly empathetic person talking to the person in front of them, not just the problem.
Yeah.
Because for him, like he came here, I have a job to do, versus I came here because you are a person with feelings that matter.
Mhm.
And like
Yeah,
that
I love the
transition.
process of watching not just Linus fall in love with these kids because like there's a certain extent where you're like, I'm falling in love with them. I
I'm
love
obsessed
them,
with
of
them. Yeah.
course. But the kids falling in love with Linus. And I think that like you watch it grow throughout, but right at the end when he's ready to leave and they throw him like the going away party, all of that, like these kids love him and just opening up to him. Sal, speaking of like their growing relationship, because Sal was abused in his previous home and had a very big like vendetta and trauma against caseworkers. So for him to then like go let him see his room, like that was the
A
Sal's
huge
big character
yeah.
arc. It was just so heartwarming.
Yeah, and
I'm
the
gonna
way
say that
that
word a million times.
I know it's so heartwarming, but also the way Linus like adjusted his expectation of the kids and then also
Yeah.
how he treated them. Like,
Mhm.
you're not just this case in this file I have. Like, let's figure out who you are. Because Lucy is speaking of personal growth for Linus,
Yes.
Lucy is everyone's lesson in this book because
Mhm.
Lucy is the 6-year-old little boy is dealing with his own trauma. I love
Mhm.
the idea of I have spiders in my head and they make
Yeah.
webs and I don't know what to do with that. And it also makes me feel like there's a lot of kids in this world that do have trauma and they don't know how to process it. And
Yeah.
like, well, my dad did this or
Mhm.
my mom was this or whatever. And to see that like paternal naturing that Linus and Arthur did for Lucy, saying
Yeah.
like, we can get these spiders out of your head. Like, you don't have to
Mhm.
become the devil. Like, you don't have to be
Yeah,
Satan.
like, you're not your dad.
You're not your dad. You're not your biology. And that's the found
Mhm.
family. Obviously, this whole book is
Yeah.
about found family. Duh.
Yeah. They
As is
adopt them in
any
the end.
as is any like queer story. Like, it's
Mhm.
all about found family and those are the most, once again, heartwarming um stories to read. I just
Yeah.
like Lucy. We just learned like it, and as a reader, right? Like, we
Mhm.
don't know anything about this little boy, and we're going to meet him, and you're like, I don't know about this little dude. Like, he's gonna mess up sometime during this book or do something.
Mhm.
But to see the child in him, to see the actual
Yeah.
person that is inside this little boy who is the Antichrist, is just
Mhm.
so cool. Like, he loves music, and I love the scene where him and Zoe are in the kitchen and he's singing Beyond
Yeah.
the Sea, and he like
Mhm.
he just he's his own worst enemy and he knows that.
Yeah.
But he
I think
doesn't
I
want to hurt
also
people.
yeah, I took it as such a good, like, obviously Lucifer is supposed to be like the epitome of Christians against gay people, and this idea of he is for people to pin homosexuality as a sin and then put that against those people. Lucy is supposed to be the epitome of that, right? Like, you're gonna call it a sin, and then it's to look past that prejudice, to look past that, like, religious labeling that people give. But I think also for me, as someone seeing like him be like, "Oh, the spiders in my head, the spiders in the head," that also felt like dealing with mental health.
Yeah,
Like, I feel like
absolutely.
I, as someone, could be like, "Hey, I have spiders in my head.
Like,
I
today I just have
sometimes
spiders.
do things that like I wish I didn't, and because of the spiders type situation." So I thought that it worked kind of two different ways.
Right. And because that these kids, especially Lucy, because whenever
Mhm.
like the townspeople are like, do you know the Antichrist is on that
Yeah.
island? Like, it always goes back to him. And may I
Mhm.
preface, all these children end up, and why this orphanage, which they don't call it that, it's a home,
It's a
um,
home.
are unique is because they are the children, like, they're like the misfit children. Like, they're the like,
Yeah.
we don't know what to do with these, so we're gonna send them to Arthur, right? And we're
Mhm.
gonna get to that boy in a second. But there's a
Yes.
quote that is set up and about this prejudice and about
Mhm.
that could be like mental health, it could be sexuality, it could be race. Because like, for instance, like all these like Chauncey and Lucy look different, and that
Yeah.
could be contextualized as different races. And so we have like the whole gamut in this book in a very beautiful way. And the
Mhm.
quote goes, just because you don't experience prejudice in your everyday doesn't stop it from existing for the rest of us.
Yeah.
You know what? Like, it's
Mhm.
when like someone's
Clock.
like being bossy, it's like, well, well, the world's been better. It's like, that is what I want to throw in some people's fucking faces. It's just well, like, just because
Yeah.
you live a happy, fine life with minimal
Mhm.
problems, like societal problems, doesn't mean the rest of us aren't dealing with it. And like,
Yeah.
that's the difference between a good person and like the prejudice in the world that I don't
Mhm.
know. I got so fired up. I was like underlining in my book. I was like, yes, like, it pisses me off because people don't realize we get so stuck in our own
Mhm.
bubble,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
literally in the book. We get stuck in our own bubble, our own problems, and this book is like, wow, like, this 6-year-old boy is dealing with these spiders in his head, and
Yeah.
every day has to fight that. Arthur is dealing with protecting these children and his own
Mhm.
secret, which we'll get to.
Uh on kind of maybe a different topic, but I want to take a moment here to talk about the romance in this book
Yes.
and the way it builds. We are at the Hardcover Podcast. We are definitely girlies who appreciate the slow burn, who appreciate
Of
the
course.
butterflies, and I think this book had like the perfect balance of it. Obviously, the romance is not A, B, maybe not even C plot, but I think it was so well done. I loved all of the imagery of Arthur just like staring at Linus, of like being like, "Oh, you fool." Like, "Oh, I just like you dear man," all the time. I especially loved Lucy like meddling in with them.
Lucy, because
Uh
he has like the precognition of like, stop it.
and he at one point when Arthur goes over to deliver the record player, and the music's playing and it says like, I didn't realize, Linus didn't realize at the time, didn't think to notice that it was all love songs. Like, I just imagine Lucy sitting there, and that's like, that's showing the heart, because that's what the point is to like look past who these kids are to like who they are. And for Lucy to be like, okay, romance song, love song, love song, love song, I will create my dad's. I
Yes,
will
I need my
put my
daddies.
dads together right now.
Yeah, Lucy was definitely the mastermind behind that, like making
Mhm.
that happen all the time. Yeah,
I
so like it's funny because from Daikimi we kept on hearing like, well, Arthur has a secret, Arthur has a secret,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
you like, how come, like, they're assholes, and here's Linus like, well, what's his secret? Like, am I in
Yeah.
danger? Like, I'm starting to feel feelings for this guy,
Mhm.
and like I don't really know what's going on, and they're being really kind to me. And of course I knew Arthur had, like, we knew that, we find out and we know that he was actually at this orphanage when
Yeah.
he was a kid. And so
Mhm.
I knew he was gonna have a power of some kind. I knew he just wasn't this like rando that just cares for these kids. Um, but they mentioned a phoenix. They mentioned
Mhm.
like the phoenix species, I guess,
Yeah.
early in the book. And I'm like, okay, Arthur has to be that. And then constantly Linus had
Mhm.
this imagery of feeling warm next to him. And then the one time, I think with the record player, he's like a
Yep.
flash of orange. And that's when I'm like, oh, he's a phoenix.
He's a
He's a
phoenix.
fucking phoenix. And this
Now
gets confirmed when they take the kids into town. And
mhm.
that asshole at the ice cream shop is like, I'm not serving you. And I just, like,
Fucking
I could have
Norman.
cried. Cause like I just
Oh,
imagine
yeah.
all of those kids' faces.
Mhm.
Cause I like in school, like I vividly remember kids trying to be included in like
Mhm.
more popular groups, and some kids would be so rude and just turn them down. And
Yeah.
you just saw how defeated they were. And I'm like, protect at all costs these children. At this point, you are in love with these children. So you're
Of
like,
course.
at all costs, we must protect. And
Mhm.
Arthur gets Big Daddy mad and he starts heating up. And even Zoe's like, Arthur, right now is not the time. And we're like, oh shit, like it's gonna happen. And that's when we find out because
Well,
Daikimi is like, here's a little key, go figure this out,
yeah,
which was
because
fun.
I think it's different balance situation, but yeah, because Linus in his reports is like writing about Arthur like he has a schoolgirl crush.
Yeah. And Daikimi's like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
And that's when Charles stepped in and was like, because all of the responses have been through Charles' perspective. And so he goes to pick up the letter, he gets the key, he gets the secret. We have a little like third act breakup of sorts in that moment. I really thought that there was going to be more to do with Charles. I
You were like,
thought
why did we stop
because
this?
even okay, with the record player, they were like, "Oh, it just sat in boxes in the back of the attic and Lucy snooped and found it." And I was like, "Oh, it's Charles' belongings. It's da 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 da." Like I was just spinning this web. I was making him a main character where he was not. And so when he went and saw the vault, like I don't know, it all made sense to me and I was reading it really quickly and I knew there was something going on with him, but I wouldn't have been able to tell you 100% that he was a phoenix before that moment because I was so convinced that it was going to have something to do with this other man.
That's so funny. No, I would say what confirmed it is like when he left with that one night and like he saw the fog
Yeah,
and
and
I
there
was
was
like,
like the well, that's when I was like, okay, he can teleport.
I just like remember like reading anyway, so I was really excited. And also like Phoenix, fucking badass. Like,
Dope. That's a dope ass
and
power.
I loved the relation that Arthur's like, I understand Lucy because I could burn this whole world down if I wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, "I have a big scary power too."
And yeah, so I thought
Mhm.
that that was like, why, like, let's stop putting him in this box of
Mhm.
that he can destroy the world because I also have been in that box and I know how it
Yeah.
feels and I want to protect him. But what
I think
Linus as a situation is that he's like, we can, yes, protect these kids, but we can't shelter them from the harsh reality that
Mhm.
is going to come to them. And that is that they have an uphill battle. And so going into the freaking town, Daigami's fucking paying off these people to keep their mouths shut.
Mhm.
The apple does not fall too far from the tree from this book and actual reality because I know this happens in the real world and it pisses me off. And these
Yeah.
people suck. And like, I love
Mhm.
Helen. And also, I'm gonna jump here. Helen and Zoe, let's fucking go. Like, let's go. We've got mommies and daddies. Like, let's go. I was so excited.
The whole village plot really reminded me of the movie Luca. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
Luca. I thought you were gonna say
'Cause
Beauty and the Beast.
well, some of that too. Some of that prejudice and hate too. But no, I just kept picturing the village as the village from Luca
Yes, imagery
and
wise,
like
absolutely.
watching all of these people like the whole town as a stereotype and then there's of course we can't just win. So there has to be like the little riot and
That
I
was
love that
cute.
in that moment it let Linus first be like I'm gonna say my piece. I'm gonna be protective and really showing his arc. But it's like, okay, it's not time for your final moment yet, Linus. Your final moment's gonna be at the end of the book. And that's when Arthur is like, let me talk now. And he's like, I don't even know what to say. Like, I'm just so angry because you're just doing this because you feel uncomfortable, because you don't understand it, and that is making you hate it. Like you are being nasty for no good reason. They were like, "Oh, well, because of our children." And then Helen's like, "None of you guys are parents."
Yep.
Like that is just so and it's so realistic to so many things in life, but literally right now, look at what the Congress is doing. There's so much shit
Yep.
of people acting out of fear, out of hate, out of the fact that they are uncomfortable
Yep.
and they take that uncomfortability, they twist and fuck around religion because I promise you that is not what that means. Like you are taking something that is
Fear
supposed to
based.
like I'm sorry here, but can we have a moment? If you are a Christian and if you're trying to use the Bible to support your hate, you're doing it wrong. That's not like you missed the entire message. And you know what? Little motherfuckers back in the 17 and 1800s used the Bible to support slavery, to prove that they were right in the
Yep.
inhumane, disgusting treatment that they had towards African Americans. And they would say, "I'm justified. I'm justified. Look at
It's
the
not one
Bible."
for one. It's not.
It's
Yeah.
like you're manipulating
It's
it,
not a
and so I
justification
loved
for it. Yep.
that scene, and, like, I just felt so connected to that exhaustion that Arthur felt in that
I'm
moment.
tired. And that's why
Yeah.
we decided. And there's this perfect quote about hate
Mhm.
in this book.
Yeah.
And it says, hate is loud, but I think you'll learn it's because it's only a few people shouting, desperate to
Mhm.
be heard. You might not ever be able to change their minds, but so as long as you remember you're not alone, you will overcome.
I literally had that saved as well.
Okay. Because, like, that's the thing. This is fear based beliefs that make hate, and hate is loud, but you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. The
Yeah.
haters are loud, but there are a lot more supporters in the shadows. And so, if you can sort through that loudness,
Mhm.
because no one's like, it's just the world we live in. No one's like gonna be the support. Hate is always gonna overshadow the support.
Yeah.
It just always is. And that
Mhm.
quote to me, I was like, I think that was him explaining to Lucy
Yeah.
about, he's like, why don't people like me? And
Mhm.
he's like, because hate's loud, but it's only a few people shouting, like desperate to be on their soapbox and prove to you. It's like, no, absolutely not. Anyways, good quotes, good all around. I was really happy Arthur had his moment because he was like, I'm gonna come out as my phoenix and be like,
Yeah.
we're not that scary. And then Helen like put a stop to it. She's like, I don't care. That scene when Lucy
Mhm.
fucks up that guy in the record shop because he was like had the crucifix on him,
Mhm.
and Linus gets into there and he's like, what happened? And Lucy's just like looking through he's like, he tried to like mess with me, and he's like so
Yeah.
unbothered.
Mhm.
And the guy's like, no, that guy sucks. Like he
No,
was
that guy really
no, that guy,
sucks.
he's fired. He's totally fired, dude.
Well, and that shows like the propaganda because you knew Lucy was gonna do something, not
Yeah.
because of like who he was, but because it's a story. Like, obviously, like the Chekhov's gun, like something was going to happen with them going to town. It wasn't gonna be entirely seamless. It had to wrap us around to our conclusion of the book.
Yeah.
But I love that in that moment, like there was still, despite the book being about the prejudice and the unfortunate reality of the real world, I loved that we got a happy ending and I loved the softness that was included. And like, obviously, a part of that's going to be that TJ Klune is a queer writer. And so it's someone from the community respecting these stories and these characters the way that they should be. And so the fact that, like, Lucy, while yes, he had to experience that little bit of hate, it wasn't then like rampaged and fully stacked against him. We had the other record shop guy being like, "Yeah, that was unbased. Like that was wrong." And then the second village scene, Lucy later says like, "Hey, we knew you guys went to go defend us, but they didn't have to be there and experience it. Like there was no like glorification of the
Yeah.
brutality." If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely. Yeah. And so at this point we see Linus
Mhm.
goes on little adventures. I mean, obviously plot happens. We got those dinner moments which are
Oh,
really
so
sweet, and in the
cute.
garden with all the kids, and just seeing him in like Chauncey's like bell, he like gets to like be a little bell. He gets like a bellhop
Yeah.
hat, and it's like so cute, and he like he always like folds his laundry for, like, he has this little thing with each kid. The
Mhm.
wyvern Theodore shows him where he's been keeping all of his
His ward.
buttons
Yeah.
because Linus gives him like little things all
Mhm.
the time, and it becomes a token of like remembering the kids. But we're all leading up
Mhm.
to this moment where the month is coming to an end. And,
Mhm.
Arthur basically says, like, stay here with us. But Linus is like, no, I have to go back. I have to
Yeah.
finish this job. And I
Mhm.
was like, you need to go back. You need to finish this job.
Yeah.
Because I knew in my heart this was a fairy tale and he was going to come back and everything was going to
Mhm.
be okay. And him
Yeah.
and Arthur were going to have their love story. But I loved that their love story didn't come to full fruition until he
Mhm.
was back. And that made it more
Yeah.
meaningful to me that this wasn't
Mhm.
like lust based or whatever. This was rooted in, I really got to know this person and they're an incredible person. Like the way Arthur speaks about Linus, like I want that in life for
Yeah.
everybody.
Mhm.
Anyways.
Oh my god, I love the quote. It was further back, but Linus said something about like, "Oh, like you think of me," and Arthur goes, "Constantly." And the fact that we then repeated that scene when Linus comes back after doing his big boy activities that we're talk about, but he comes back and all of the kids say their demands, their conditions, and it's all just about like loving them and about,
Mhm.
it was
Being
so
with
cute.
them. Mhm.
But then Arthur sends them all away and he's so guarded, right? Because this literally happened to him before. He was dating Charles and Charles left and just used him and all of that. And for Linus to be like, please, like, ask me again. And he repeats the lines. And like you were saying, like, now that they're secure, they get to have that moment. And it was
Lucy's
so
like, "Won't you
sweet.
just kiss already?"
Yeah.
And I love when they come down, they're Arthur and Linus are gonna get married, and they're like, "We need to work on that
Yeah.
eavesdropping." Like he just
Oh my god, the fact that like because the epilogue is a time jump, and they're like, yeah, and the kids have done few sleepovers over at Zoe's house.
Yeah, I loved that. Oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
loved that. And that's also when we find out about Zoe and
Mhm.
Helen. But Linus's big stand to upper management, he
Yes.
goes back for a month.
Mhm.
back
That's a
home.
long time.
Yeah, and he the whole time he's just so depressed. He's listening to his
Mhm.
records. He brings a picture of them from the party and
Uh-huh.
puts it on his desk as like a fuck you. And management's like, that's a strike. That's a strike. And he's like, I don't fucking care.
I don't care. Give me the demerits.
Yeah, they give me the demerits. And so he goes up to
Mhm.
upper management and is gives this whole like monologue of like what this is all about. And I did
Mhm.
not think it was gonna go well for him. But during this
Yeah.
time, he's also starting to steal. Like he's full rebel now. Like he is full like fuck your rules and
Yeah.
regulations. Like
Mhm.
I'm stealing these and like I'm gonna do some good. And so we get to a point where they actually what he recommends is that they
Mhm.
stay put. Everything is fine.
Yeah.
Arthur's a great person, and like which obviously we're like yeah, duh. Um,
Obviously.
and they like approve it. They're like yeah, okay. Because I think Miss Bubblegum had something. She's gonna come back. But she comes down
Mhm.
to Linus and introduces herself with her first name. Is it like
Mhm.
Colette or something? I forget her.
I think it was started with a D. I thought it was like Doreen.
Yeah, something like that. But she like I think she's gonna come back and I think she's gonna have a bigger role in the next book.
Well,
Um
cause yeah, that's what's interesting is that one, I think that it's such like on brand government to be like they wanted to find something bad because they just like Charles had the suspicions. He had his anger, you know what I mean? Like they wanted a reason to shut it down. And because Linus didn't provide them with one, that kind of like 1 month later, like quiet admission of like slip it under the door and be like, yeah, I guess we approve it. I guess, whatever. Like that's so on brand. But for then Linus to then be collecting these reports, and I didn't know what he was going to do with them all. But the fact that he went to the press and was like, let's get everyone outraged. Let's show off these conditions. Let's try to make a change one step at a time with the people. I thought that was a perfect conclusion because I was really nervous rereading the book that I was like, okay, I understand if you have an idea to write this book, you're going to sit down with this premise of like the orphanage and the government and all of these themes. That's all real world stuff. But it's like, okay, well, I want a happy ending though. And I think the happy ending was the perfect balance of being like, things are working towards the better. The characters didn't just like exist in their bubble and pretend like nothing bad ever happened. Like that's the Harry Potter ending where like Harry witnessed all of these injustices throughout his childhood and then he becomes a worker in the same system and never tries to change. Like that sucks. That's not a happy ending. So I really appreciated that he was like, nope, they did the change. We're gonna try to call it homes. We get to see all like the time jump of things changing. But then at the end of the day, like for Linus, he's like, there's only so much I can do, but for us, we're gonna try to adopt these kids. We're gonna try to make it more official. I loved it.
yeah, and I loved the messaging of like this isn't this is a fairy tale for them,
Mhm.
but there's
Yeah.
more they always said but there's more kids, there's more kids,
Mhm.
there's more kids, and it's that you never may be able to beat the system, but you
Mhm.
can be a force for change in that system.
Yeah.
And I just really think Linus and Arthur, like the fact that we know now that they're getting a Yeti
Yeah.
and they loved him, they're like, the minute we saw his cerulean eyes, I'm like, oh. So
Yeah.
they're adding another kids, which obviously that's what the next book is going to be about. This
Yeah.
Yeti, like, I just like, and of course the creatures should make it fun and like whimsical and
Mhm.
stuff, but another foster child. But yeah, they got a lot of kids that they're adopting.
They got a lot of
It's a
kids.
lot of kids. So before we wrap up, there's one more quote I had, and it's about the
Yes.
humanity part, and maybe you have another one too, Aubrey.
Mm.
It says humanity is so weird. If we're not laughing, we're crying or running from our lives because monsters are trying to eat us, and they don't even
Mhm.
have to be real monsters. They could be the ones we make up in our heads. Don't you think that's weird?
Yeah. Yeah, I
And that
had
goes
that
back to
one
the
saved.
spiders of like
Mhm.
sometimes we make up like this hate, this like idea of hate and prejudice. Maybe those are the monsters that like we make up ourselves. And
Yeah.
like, isn't that kind of weird that we create these
Mhm.
problems for humanity that don't need to be created? Like, if I want to wear a blue shirt tomorrow, why do I have to be scared of being labeled as something? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just
Mhm.
because I wear this or put my hair this way, that labels me. Anyways,
Yeah,
so
I
that
really liked that one. I
yeah.
have one here. It's from Linus's like final speech, his pitch to the
Oh,
kids
yes.
when he wants to come back. I thought it was so
I
like I
love that.
literally teared up at it. And though I've lived in a world where you didn't exist for most of my life, I don't believe that there's a world I can be in any longer. It started with the sun and it was warm, and then came the sea and it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was followed by this place, this island, so mysterious and wonderful. But it was you who gave me peace and joy like I've never had before. You gave me a voice and a purpose. Nothing would have changed if it hadn't been for all of you. I believe they've listened to me, but the only reason I knew what to say at all was because of what you've taught me. We're not alone. We never have been. We have each other.
Yeah. And then he recites Sal's poetry. That
Yes.
and I was like, "Oh my gosh," which you guys have to, and if you read the book at this point, you know
Mhm.
about it, but I love that. It's a little
So
too long to
sweet.
read.
Mhm.
But oh, guys, I love this book. I
This was
There was a heartwarming
great.
conclusion, but also I feel like there is more story to be told in a way
Mhm.
that doesn't feel like a money grab or anything. I just feel like we just really love these characters, and this is like the origin story of this family and like what happens next. And I want more Lucy.
Yes. I wonder if there's gonna be a time jump.
I
I could
know.
see that happening.
I'm so
Like a
excited.
teenage Lucy?
Oh, I know, like, Lucy I thought about this. Lucy gets, like, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, like, finds
Mm,
love
mhm.
or, like, the dating
Yeah.
pool of, like
Yeah. Well, in all of this, there was this heavy theme of being like, hey, you work for the magical children, but they have to become adults one day. What happens when they
And
enter
what?
society? And so I would be very interested, especially like the title being Somewhere Beyond the Sea. I think we're leaving the house. I think we're leaving the island. And I think we're seeing what happens when these guys grow up. And maybe not Lucy. I would bet Lucy's a teenager. I bet it's like Sal and Fee really entering into adulthood.
Yeah, and the challenges that come with that, and I'm sure extremely upper management is going to be back, and we will see it. I don't
Yes.
think Charles is done.
No, no, I think he's coming back, even though he had his little minor exit, and I don't know if when TJ Klune finished this book, if he had in mind for a book 2 since it did take 4 years. You didn't necessarily need it. It ended in a satisfactory way, but I'm very excited to read it. I hope you guys are all very excited. I hope you loved this book as much as we did. And if you are interested, we are definitely going to be reading Somewhere Beyond the Sea and
Yes,
reviewing it. Excited to
absolutely.
jump into that. We just have to take a quick pause for some motherfucking Onyx Storm
Yeah,
business.
Onyx Storm people. I'm excited because we're gonna read this really big book next in this fantasy
Yeah.
series, and then we're gonna come back and this is considered fantasy, but
Yeah.
it's a great palate cleanser to go in between,
Mhm.
and it's like I said, such a great read. So, with that being said, please let us know if you've read this book, what you thought about it. If you've read the next one, no spoilers just yet. We'll be reading that, but just let us know. Be like, you guys need to read the next one. But with that being said, like, subscribe, again, we have memberships. So if you want some exclusive content, you can find it linked below.
Yes. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us and happy reading.